Good evening, all of you. I chose tonight's subject because I've been moving more and more towards helping you recognize that if you were an alcoholic, I could take alcohol away and you would survive. If you were a drug addict, I could take drugs out of your life and you would survive. However, we can't do that with food. So that number one. That being the case, the issue of losing weight is a psychological one. And unless we move into that level of psychology and understanding, we're not going to have long term success. One other thing I'd like to start with, I've been doing a lot of, let's call it research, but basically search reading. And one of the things that I've discovered is that after 3 years, 90% of the people who go on a weight loss program have gained all the weight back. So unless we simply accept the fact that our program works if you work it, we're going to focus on your head and how your head relates to weight loss. The first thing I want to point out is that we've been talking about the adult self and the child self. And I want to go back to the very basic of all of us, which is when a baby is born, it is totally helpless. It can do nothing. And in order to survive, one of the things that a baby is born with is anger. And it is that anger which causes survival, because whether it's conscious or not, that anger gets the attention of those around it. And by virtue of expressing that anger, and you all know what it is that I'm talking about because it's universal, that baby cries at night, you pick it up, you change its diaper, you feed it, and that anger in that child is a survival mechanism. We've been talking about the adult self, and we have been talking about the child self. I don't think there's one of you out there who would deny that they speak to themselves. And that speech, in part from my perspective, with regard to success in losing weight, is an adult self and a child self. Let's also agree, and this is important, that when it comes to a child, it knows very little about life. It wants what it wants when it wants it. There is nothing in between. And in my experience, once the child gets what it wants, it's over and done with until it wants something else. With us adults, it doesn't quite work that way. So I want to start off by saying, if we are not going to have conversation, if we are going to shut down, then long-term success is never going to be part of the weight loss process for you. Now, last time we talked about the relevance of self-respect. All of us, our entire society, would be different if self-respect were truly something that people dealt with in a meaningful and positive level. One of the things that I've experienced in my lifetime is the fact that when I respect myself, I like myself. And when I don't respect myself, I'm not happy about myself. Now, the child in that equation is something that we need to look at, because all of us, unless you're going to say that you're hallucinating, hear that voice. That I want what I want when I want it. And that leads us to the title of this evening: Why Does the Child Self-Sabotage? And I kind of noticed it's kind of a double entendre, because why does the child self, and it says self-sabotage. The key here, and let's start with basics. The key here is survival. You cannot survive without food. And if you don't learn to live with it, then the whole reason we're here is meaningless. And what I mean by that is food will never go out of your life. The power of food with regard to survival will never go out of your life, which means for the rest of your life, you and the food are going to be partners. And how you deal with that aspect of it is critically important. Another thing I'd like to point out is that one of the things that I learned as a psychologist is that you already have all of the answers. The fact that you can't see them at this point in time is now only a factor of what you've experienced and how you deal with those experiences. And if any of you remember the story I told you a long time ago about being in the car with my children in the development in which we lived, and a child down about a block away was coming toward us on his bicycle. And out of nowhere, the bicycle went over and he fell. He got up immediately, got on his bicycle, and went back towards his house. And I said to my kids, see what's going on? He's choosing misery. And my kids looked at me and they said, What are you talking about? What do you mean he's choosing misery? I said, he fell off his bicycle. What did he do? He didn't cry. He didn't rub. He didn't do anything. Got back on his bicycle and he started back towards his house. And I'll tell you what's going on. He's not going to cry until he gets into that house. The minute he opens the door, he's going to start to cry. And the reason he didn't do it is because he didn't have an audience. He didn't get that need met. Oh, I'm hurt. Please take care of me. People choose misery because it suits other things that are going on within them. Now, all of you know what I'm talking about with that voice that says, I want. And for the sake of our discussion, I want you to accept two things. First of all, it's not a hallucination. You actually hear that voice. And I've called that voice a child. So there's you and the voice is real. It is not a hallucination. Number two, it is a child. And children know very little about life. And so you are dealing with something and you have those conversations and you admit, if you're being honest with yourself, that those conversations take place. The child wants what it wants when it wants it. And the reason it sabotages is because of the fact, for example, as I shared with you a moment ago, the picture that it had in its head when it fell off that bicycle was not what it wanted at that moment. It wanted consolation. Feeling the hurt, expressing it at that moment gave it nothing. Going back to its house and bawling and crying and whatever got it the attention that it wanted, and that's why it chose not to express it. Number two, understand that in every child, the significant issue is the anger the child is born with, which is a survival mechanism. That child knows nothing about anything. It is totally dependent on you. And if you ignore it, and the child, has all it can breathe, it can move, it can cough, it can swallow, it can do all of those kinds of things. You'll pardon me. I'm going to turn this off if I can. Here we go. It's only my cell phone, and that goes all day. Now, it is a measure of survival. And let me explain. The child is hungry. It has the capacity to swallow, but if you don't feed it, swallowing is meaningless. But if the child expresses anger, and you know that babies do, and that anger is all encompassing. That child doesn't just cry, it consumes it completely to the point where attention is paid to that child, and that is its mechanism for survival. All of us have part of that in us. And one of the things that I learn is in therapy, my patients had all of the answers. I had none of the answers. How can I know what's going on in you in your life? And my job was to get that patient to focus and to search. My job was the Sherpa guide, to ask questions. And in that, cause the patient to search their historical memory, come up with the choices, and that's what made therapy work. One of the things that we do not have if we're going to be successful is the luxury of time. Also, it's time all of us started to recognize that we are in charge of ourselves. The child sabotages because the child wants what it wants when it wants it. And let's be very clear about this. You have a 7-year-old, male, female, irrelevant, a child of your own, a nephew, a niece, a neighbor's child, and you've taken that 7-year-old child in your car because you've told that child you're taking it to the park. The parking lot is closed, so you have to park a block away. You go around, you open the door, and you're out there, and what's the first thing you do? You unbuckle the child, unless it unbuckles itself, and you take its hand. And the reason you take its hand is because you're in charge and you want to protect that child. We now start to walk, and the child sees something and pulls on your holding arm. And do you let go? No, because what's going to happen? It's not protected. And the child pulls harder. And you don't let go because you're protecting the child. And now the child starts yelling and screaming at you. You never listen to me. You never give me what I want. And the reason you still do not let go is because the child, out of control, could get hurt, and you, as the responsible adult, are not letting go, not because of any other reason, but your job is to protect. Now remember, that child wants what it wants when it wants it, and it wants it because it wants it. And anger, as we talked about a few moments ago, is there because it's a survival mechanism. And all of that is impinging on you. Now, I am me. I consider when I hear that voice, my child self. It wants what it wants when it wants it. It has no meaningful understanding of life because the experience is not there. And if you let it go, if it goes out of control, not are you only going to be upset, but you're risking the child itself. So let's begin by number one, acknowledging there is a child self. It needs to be paid attention to, and it wants what it wants when it wants it. Once it gets it, and I don't know if you've noticed, once you've noticed, hi Australia, once it's noticed, the child stops. It's finished. It got what it wanted and it stops until it wants something else. And what it wants, and this is what's important, is based upon limited life experience. And the anger issue remains there because it's what the child learned. It was innate within it with regard to getting its needs met. Now, next thing, and this is very important. Most of you know that I am an advocate of Alcoholics Anonymous, its methodology. One of the things that I've learned, particularly when I was an active psychologist, is you can't bottle it up. You've got to express it. And Alcoholics Anonymous has a model that I fell in love with. And let me tell you what it is that I'm talking about. Number one, compared to all of the other programs, Alcoholics Anonymous is the one that I advocate. I think Narcotics Anonymous is terrific, but the reason I choose Alcoholics Anonymous is because what I felt I discovered was that in Narcotics Anonymous, you have a significantly lower number of long-termers who've remained drug-free. Whereas in Alcoholics Anonymous, there are many old-timers. And you get from old-timers experience. They've been there. They feel what you want because they've felt it themselves. And they've kept their sobriety by sharing what it is. And once you admit that you're not perfect, that you're fallible, it's okay to be imperfect. How many of you know people who can't lose because the feeling of losing makes them feel terrible about themselves? Most successes in life have come by accident, by experimentation, by making mistakes. Now, if I can accept the fact that I'm fallible, then I recognize being imperfect is normal and natural. If I hold it in, if I don't express it, if I don't share what it is, then it creates another problem. Many of you know that I have this model in my head, primary colors versus primary feelings. Now, the primary feelings are very interesting. mad, glad, sad, scared, and hurt. And notice that there is only one positive primary emotion: glad. Now, if you're one of these people who is uncomfortable with being glad, we can talk about that on the side. So, what do we have left? Mad, sad, scared, and hurt. Mad is always the outcome of fear or sadness because something has happened. The person, the hurt is there. The hurt is repressed, held in. And mad is an active emotion. It always seeks expression. And again, we're back to the primary issue that madness, anger is in us as a survival mechanism. So if we hold that anger in, we're using up all kinds of energy that comes from birth. And what happens is, when I suppress the anger in me, what happens to my energy? And as the pressure builds up, there are other issues that occur. That child is part of you. And the reason it's part of you is you've had a lifetime of experience. Remember, I said to you again in the past, I have never seen an adult truly having fun who was not behaving as though they were a child. Adults have no capacity for fun. Now, if I take that capacity away from you, what's the quality of life? And so I'm looking at these meetings that we have here, and that's what we're having, is a meeting. The only reason I'm sitting here is because every meeting should have at some point or other somebody who has experience in life, who has a methodology, and wants to share that with you in an environment that's safe. And that's the other thing. The reason I've chosen Alcoholics Anonymous is because people choose a sponsor. So I'm like a sponsor. I've had experience in life. I can share my experiences if we have discussion. But I can't tell you what to do. And the reason I can't tell you what to do, it's what I would do for me. How can we understand that my experiences in life, on a generalized level, are similar to everyone else, but my specific issues are the ones that built up over the years that brought me to this place? Another thing, I don't know how many of you watch this teenage area going on. I don't know about you. I don't understand it at all. And the reason I don't understand it is because what I've seen more and more and more is holding it in, using social media and not truly sharing and learning from other people. When there are no limits, and that's part of the issue, when there are no limits, there is always acting out. And the reason there is acting out is very simple. If I don't know the rules, no matter what situation I'm in, I'm looking for the walls. Because once I find that, I have safety. I'm not overstepping. So, why does the child sabotage? The child sabotages in order to control. The child sabotages because it wants what it wants when it wants it. It doesn't have the insight to understand. Without that life experience, it's in danger. You were children. Think of all of the mistakes you made as a child. How many of those experiences did you have that were teaching experiences? You touch a hot frying pan. After the first time, you're going to think twice about touching that frying pan. However, before you have that experience, and hopefully you learn it in some other way, you haven't got any idea. You want it, you touch it, oh! And now you realize what you didn't. And some of you have an issue with me because I seem always to go back to what Alcoholics Anonymous calls a higher power. One of the things I noticed is the fact that the world started with Adam and Eve. And what was very interesting to me, this higher power supposedly breathes life into Adam and Eve. And for a period of time, and I've read it over and over again, Adam didn't know anything about anything. And it was not until he experienced life forms around him, and those life forms all had mates. And it's then he realized that he didn't have a mate. So it was only through discovery. And that's the same for us. This here, without us intercommunicating, what's going to happen is we tend to repeat over and over and over again the same outcomes because we're afraid of change. Children want you to love them. Remember we talked about the miasmic children, the ones in England, and in this one nursery, the children were prospering, whereas in the other nurseries, and these were all children who did not have parents, the kids were prospering, and they discovered that the reason they were prospering because one of the cleaning women in the middle of the night would come in to clean and was picking up the kids and hugging them and You're treating them nicely, and that physical contact was necessary in order for them to feel value, importance, love. The mere fact that you put up with me here says that we all need the same thing. And the interaction comes from speaking up, asking questions. I'll give you an example. Just before Mother's Day, a woman called me on the phone during the program. She was doing the program. And she said to me, is it all right if I do this, if I'm all right as I do that? And I said, stop. What's your question? She says, Mother's Day is coming up. My children had started asking questions, never really asking me the question, but justifying the fact. And I said, stop. What is it that you want? And she said, what I really want is to enjoy myself. I said, terrific. Let's do something that'll enjoy yourself. What do you want? Well, I want to eat. I said, okay, let's eat. She said, I could just eat. I said, well, you could just eat, but let me ask you a question. Aside from eating, in quotes, what do you want? Well, she said, I'd like to eat, but I don't really want to put on any weight. I said, okay. Now, let me ask you a question. Why do you want to eat? And she said, well, they're taking me out and all this stuff is there, and I'd like to enjoy it. I said, great. So number one, you're not doing it for anybody else. You're doing it for yourself. She said, right. And do you recognize that if you do this, there might be an issue with your program? She said, well, I understand. So I want to be somewhat controlled because I don't really want to, but I do want to enjoy myself. I said, okay. So number one, you want to do it. Number two, you recognize there are some issues involved. Number three, don't try to justify yourself. You want what you want. Now let's put it into a bigger basket. What we ended up doing was creating a program for her for Mother's Day that she adhered to. And what was wonderful is she was able to call me up on Wednesday after Mother's Day. And this is the important thing. Or maybe it was Tuesday. And said, Dr. Schwartz, I lost 1.5 pounds. I said, okay. She said, no, you gave me what I wanted. I felt good about it. I was in control. I accepted the fact that you're sharing with me something that I had never thought of. I want to tell you thank you because I really feel great. And now that I realize it, what you're telling me is I can lead my life the way I want to like it if I recognize that when I make changes, they have to be meaningful to me. Hi, Julie. Now, this again, we're back to this important thing. These meetings that we are having here are not broad enough because so many of you, for whatever your reasons are holding back. How can we learn from each other? How can you learn from your life experience? If you don't know what, remember what I'm saying to you. You have all of the answers. I shared with you last week my simple one that still bothers me today about the children in Europe who were starving. My mother puts food down in front of me. I push the plate away. And this is just before World War II. And my mother says to me, "You're not getting up from the table until you finish the food. Children in Europe are starving." Now, come on, guys. You know as well as I, whether I finish that plate or I don't finish that plate, it's not going to impact on the kids who are starving in Europe. And the reason I had mentioned that is because I had gone out, I had to eat. There was still food on my plate. And the thought from way back when I was a kid, the guilt and shame that I accrued because of my mother's comment was there. And here, this food on a plate, and I'm going to throw it away. And I felt shame and I felt guilt until I stopped myself and recognized that it had nothing to do with anything else. It only had to do with me. Now, the program works. We have promised 15 pounds minimum every 30 days, month since the beginning. So and that's why I don't talk about the program. If it didn't work, you wouldn't be here. Now, if it works, there's only one thing left. I have to work the program. But if I'm not perfect, then let me accept my imperfection. She did not lose 3-4 pounds that week. She only lost 1.5 pounds. Did she have the right to do that? The answer is you're darn straight. Did she understand that she wasn't going to lose probably the full amount? The answer was yes. Did she understand what it was all about? She wanted to step out of the box without destroying the box. So it would take her a little bit longer. And that's for us for the future if we focus on it. Remember, when we finish with what it is we're doing, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, we're going to be left with the issue of, did I do all this work to weigh less and not have gotten something out of it? And we go back then to what I said before. The research that I've read says, regardless of the program, if you do not have phase 2, phase 3, learning to live with food, which is what we're doing psychologically here right now, making a shortcut. Because I'm not doing therapy. What I'm doing is helping you set up a structure that's going to work for you. How many human beings do you know who are put in cages and are not constantly thinking about how to escape the cage? And the answer is, it's part of human nature. And therefore, you live in this world. You chose to lose weight. You didn't have to justify it. It's what you wanted. But now other thoughts and other images are there. And it's those thoughts and those images that you have to teach the child. And here's what's important. I say you have to teach the child. The child is going to make its mistakes. And the child is going to seek unhappiness, like the kid on the bicycle. Because at that moment, what he wanted, which was attention and caring and a hug, he wouldn't have gotten if he allowed himself to start crying and deal with it before running into the house. We all have these pictures and images there. And when you understand that, as I did, because I accepted the fact that that guilt and shame was an old picture, and I left my plate and accepted the fact that that guilt and that shame that I felt was an old tape. It was irrational. I was still uncomfortable, but once I recognized, I changed the image. Just one thing, I want to read this. Our family had a Mother's Day brunch. I followed the modified plan. I'm doing a milk day today as suggested, but keep cheating and picking on the leftovers from brunch. I know I shouldn't, but they taste so good I can't help myself. I am feeling like a failure. Should I just start over tomorrow? What's the answer? That person was out of control, but recognized it and didn't have a plan. That's what we're all about. Now, the other part is starting over. There is no starting over on our program. It's either doing it or not doing it. As you remember, I've told you very often, Dr. Chu would say, one robin does not a summer make. Therefore, we're here. And the question is, who are you sharing it with? And first, start sharing it with yourself. Accept the fact that I said to my child self, hey, kiddo, that image that you have of children starving in Europe is a fake image. And as long as you have that fake image and don't change it, because you can change those images. That kid could have chosen to start crying in the street. He chose not to. He didn't know any better. But now that you and I have talked, There always is a plan based upon the fact, and that's why we've changed the name of our company to Act You in the Middle, because if you are not the most important person in your life, then what's going on? And remember, you can't be selfish if you don't have a self. And that's why self respect is so important. The day after I recognized that and threw the stuff in the garbage, I thought about it. I'm thinking about it today. And can I tell you something? I'm so glad that I learned that old tapes were playing in my head. I still have thoughts and discomfort. I'm not arguing that fact. But I'm not doing what I know is stupid. It was based upon whatever the heck I learned that night with my mother and uh, the starving children. I had pictures, I had images, I felt guilt, I felt shame. I'm still uncomfortable. But now it's not making me problematic because I recognize it's irrational. To stuff my face when I'm full is ridiculous. I'm taking care of me, and I like me better for it. I like my child self. And the reason I like my child self is because I get so many crazy ideas. Because my child self doesn't have a lot of boundaries and is always talking to me about stuff. Now, I don't know about you, but that child self is a vital part of my being able to enjoy my life. But I'm not going to let that child self sabotage. And the reason it's sabotaging, remember what I said. It's sabotaging because that initial anger that was felt by the child when it was born, and you still have it in you. One of the big problems today, you have an opinion. I have an opinion. Your opinion is different than my opinion. What I've found out more and more in this society is you don't want to really hear what I have to say. And I don't really want to hear what you have to say. If your opinion is different than mine, I'm right and you're wrong. And therefore, my job is to get you to come over to my side. Are we learning anything? No. Enough. I want to learn and understand because there are things in my position and there are things in your position that may enhance what I do. That child is vital. That child needs to be paid attention to. That child has thoughts and ideas that seem crazy. But that's also where innovation can come from. But, and that's, remember, but washes out everything that went before it. But it cannot have control. It's too dangerous. I Is it okay to use caffeine? Will it help or hurt my weight loss? The answer is caffeine is not an issue as far as weight loss is concerned. Caffeine is an issue for some people who are sensitive to it, it may keep you awake, it may have cause you some agitation because of your sensitivity. But as far as weight loss is concerned, caffeine is not an issue. I had balsamic vinegar in my salad accidentally. Did I just ruin my whole program chemistry? How long will it take for me to recover? Here we go again. And this is what I want you to hear. One robin does not a summer make. The person made a mistake. It may or may not impact on the program. The point is, it was a mistake. Let it go. And remember also, there is no ruining the program. You're either doing it or you're not doing it. And therefore, the answer is it's over, it's done with. Pay better attention in the future. Start with milk days. Let's move on. Now, here's a tough one. How much Singota flour can I have on a veggie day? Now, Singota flour is not the issue. What you simply do is count the number of ounces as part of your daily routine. Have a variety of vegetables and add it to it, and you'll have the best nutrition there is. The more we look for trouble, we're going to find it. One of the things that I love is the fact that when we can combine conventional and non-conventional methodologies, we go further. Last question. I drink a lot of water. How much is too much? The answer is really very simple. First and foremost, when you drink too much, it can cause a problem because the flushing can leave your body with less overall nutrients. The answer is between 64 and 128 ounces. Now, what you simply do is take your body weight, cut it in half, 64 at the bottom. So if you're 200 pounds, we're talking about 100 ounces. That's between 64 and 128. So unless you have some symptoms, it's simple, it's fine. The only time the overflushing or the under is when we experience symptoms as a result. Questions? Take the risk. Email them. Call me on the telephone. leave a message on 973-243-0777. If we do this together, we're all going to grow. And when we grow, food is not going to be a problem in our life because each of us is going to create a lifestyle that fits you. The way I live is the way I live. It's no more right than how you live. Should we both have the same results? And what is that result? I don't want to weigh more because that for me is a problem. So if my lifestyle doesn't make me sick and your lifestyle doesn't make you sick and you're happy with it, we're both winners. Thank you for listening, and I love comments. Take care, all of you, and talk to you soon.